Raymond, the Giants-Dodgers are locked into an absolute barn burner of a series right now. And this reminded me of last year's podcast season when we were locked in a barn burner with our esteemed co-host Louis B's podcast. Louis B is the only Rams fan in the world cast. Now, Raymond, what are some of the highlights that you can remember from that matchup?
Gosh, the first thing that comes to mind is all the unforced errors, and I'm not talking about tennis. I'm talking about in the podcast world, when you're in head-to-head competition, there was a lot of unforced errors that Louis B committed. And not only that, but he led the league in unforced errors that year and committed the most unforced errors in that matchup alone, more than any other matchup of that whole season.
Bad lighting, just horrible audio drift. The camera was off. The angles were off. The green screen was a mess. I mean, it was like he was his first time ever recording a podcast. That's what it felt like. The green
screen wasn't even green. I believe it was blue, the old version.
Major. And then not only that, I have to say, let's give props to the staff we've assembled, the crew we have here, some of the greatest audio and video editing programmers on planet Earth.
Yes, shout out to all those guys that participated in some of the biggest projects that you guys may have heard of. Perhaps you've heard of a little film called Jurassic Park. We have some of those guys. Perhaps you've heard of KMBR. We have some of those guys. Perhaps you've heard of 95.7 The Game. We have some of those guys. Our team is just made up of all-star people from sports to motion picture. We have them both. We're covered on both ends. That's why our videos are flawless and are among the best in the business.
This is the GoldCast.
Boom! Welcome to another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis the First, baby.
Boom! Raymond, gigantic show today. Can barely even be contained. That's how big this show is. We obviously did not record on Monday. We had some scheduling conflicts, but we are back, and we are going to start with the huge series going on right now in Los Angeles, Giants-Dodgers. Obviously, this is a battle for not only the NL West, but for the entire National League. These are, right now, the two best teams in baseball going head-to-head. And this series has not disappointed in the slightest. Let's go over it, Ray. Lots to talk about here. I want to start with Game 1. Game 1, Ray, kind of a wonky start. Gausman looks very unsettled. Gonsolin for the Dodgers, equally as unsettled. Both pitchers only ended up playing 3 innings. Gausman gets out of the third, basically gets out of a bases loaded situation, but he 2 games in a row against the Dodgers has not looked himself. He's got a little bit of the yips when it comes to this team. And this is something he needs to figure out because there's a strong chance for the first time in this long storied rivalry spanning almost 100 years, the first time that we might face each other in the playoffs. I think it's bound to happen. But let's go through some more of this. Posey comes back and has been off for 10 days, and it's like no time has passed at all. Opens up with a 2-run homer to take the lead right there in the first, immediately followed by Wilmer Flores, who we're going to talk about a little bit later in this show. He comes back, boom, 3 up. Dodgers take 2 in the first inning as well from Gausman, and it's basically 3-2 for the entire game. And then the 7th inning happens. We drop 4 on them. We just roast the Dodgers, including that 2-run double from Thairo Estrada. Final score 7-2. Then Game 2 happens, and I don't even really want to talk too much about Game 2. I'm just going to get to the very end where Tyler Rogers lets Matt Beatty, Chris Taylor, and Will Smith all score on a 3-1 walk-off. End of the game, we lose 6-8.
Although that was predicated by the bullpen giving up 3 runs to make it 6-5.
Facts. You're not wrong about that.
I forget who pitched before Rogers, but that person was also, to me, the bullpen failed in Game 2 across the board.
And which sucks because the bullpen was lights out. In Game 1, you had Zach Little, Jarlin Garcia, Dominic Leone, Jay Jackson, Jake McGee. They combined for 6 shutout innings. Six shutout innings they deliver. Now, Game 3, we basically do the reverse of game one. We basically just flip it on them. We do to them what they did to us. Giants are down 2-1 in the ninth. Wilmer Flores, once again, hits a 2-run homer off Kenley Jansen, their closer. Huge one. We take the lead. Mike Tauchman also ends up scoring. Final score, 4-2. Bye-bye. Rogers is excellent with the save. I will say that comes back hard in game 3 to take it. We are now leading in this series 2-1. Final game tonight. Still must win. But even if we did lose, we would still be up 1 game ahead of the Dodgers. Raymond, what has been your reaction to this, in my opinion, an absolutely barn burner of a series right now between the Giants and Dodgers?
It definitely has playoff vibes, which is pretty exciting because the two best teams in the entire National League both reside in the NL West. The Giants being the number 1 team in the league or in the National League, and the Dodgers being the second best team in the National League. And we have a 2-game lead against them going into tonight's game. So it's a must win. To have a 3-game buffer would be terrific. To have that drop to 1 game would be unfortunate. And to be honest, the Dodgers have just had a slight edge throughout the season, but a win tonight would solidify another win in the series, which means they're tied in terms of series wins. The Dodgers have won a couple series. The Giants have won a couple of series. And it would be the second time in a row that or second time in 3 matchups that we've taken 3 of 4 of them. 3 out of 4 from them, which would be great. And I think that, to me, these are must-win games because of the division implications and how that plays in seeding down the line. Obviously, it's very early. We still have a couple months to go before that really has any pertinence. But establishing that kind of psychological confidence now, I think, is big because there's a huge psychological element to baseball. And I felt like if they were to drop the game yesterday and, potentially split or, lose this series against the Dodgers, then I think that the Dodgers would have a psychological edge over the Giants. And I don't think that's really that's not for a fan, and also perhaps from the Giants' perspective, is not necessarily what they want going into, closer to October baseball. Because baseball's streaky, and it's also psychological because you can get in your own head, and you can play into good streaks, you can play into bad streaks, you can also play into just bad juju, like, oh, this one team just has our number. The Dodgers are the last team you want to give that psychological edge to. There are other teams that have played us well this season, but the Dodgers is kind of because of their position in the National League, and more specifically the National West, I think that it's even more important that they not give up that edge to the Dodgers and seal the series win tonight.
Plus, Raymond, the Dodgers suck. So that's also why you don't want to give the edge.
Yeah, you don't want to lose to interim champions.
I don't want to lose to the TV title, Intercontinental champs, the Dodgers. I don't at all. I don't mind losing to the world champs, the Nationals, the current world champions of baseball, but I don't want to lose to the interim champs. And we didn't lose to the Nationals. We swept them last time. So there's that as well. Yeah, this series has been absolute fire. It's been really tight. Every game is neck break. Every game, they're going for the throat. You're never comfortable with either lead going into the ninth, regardless of which team you are. No lead is safe, and it has just been it's just exactly what you want. We play them. We have one more series, then we have to play them again. But tonight is the last game we have to play them in Los Angeles for the year. The rest of the games will all take place in San Francisco, which I'm very happy about.
Yeah, and the next series is like next week. So they'll be coming back to San Francisco next week, which is a huge series. And it's only a 2-gamer, but amazing. And then they'll be back in early September, right before Labor Day weekend, I believe, in early September for another series. That'll be the biggest one.
Yeah. It will be. It will be, because then in September, it's basically us and the Padres duking it out literally to the final games at the very end of the season.
Or excuse me, the next week's series is a 3-game series. I misread the schedule.
Yeah, it's 7 of 10. 7 of 10 games against the Dodgers. Really great the way this is lining up. This very much has 49er Seahawks vibes. Like we've said a million times on the show, if you're not watching baseball right now, you are really, really missing out. And if you're into the Niners, this is Niners Seahawks right here. Exact same thing. Both teams battling out. This is very 2019-ish. And I think that's the best way that I can kind of sell this on you. That this has got very much 2019 Niners Seahawks trying to, for playoff seeding, for control of the division. It's the exact same thing right now with the Giants and the Dodgers. And it is billed as advertised. These games are nuts. All right, Raymond, let's move on. Big news to talk about today, both good and bad. Let's start with the good. First up, our boy Fred Warner in the building. Brand new contract. Drop it down for the GoldCast Empire. Let them know, what does this new deal look like?
Well, it was a deal we all knew needed to happen, and there was assurance from the 49ers brass that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of when, really. That's how I saw it happening. So 5-year deal, $95 million, $40.5 million guaranteed, so nearly half, and he's with us for 5 more years. So this will pretty much solidify his career to remain in San Francisco, assuming there's 9-year run is really good. He was at the end of his rookie year contract. And the one thing that stands out to me is his position is pivotal in the defense. He's essentially the quarterback of the defense. He's been one of the, if not the most healthiest defender we have at that position. So the fact that he has such a crucial role in the defense, and he's also been the healthiest, hasn't missed a game since we drafted him in 2018. This speaks volumes for, just hitting an absolute home run with this pick. And he went to a Pro Bowl last year, first team All-Pro, arguably should have gone the year before that. I thought in 2019 he was also playing at a Pro Bowl level. But, I digress. Either way, the fact is now he's with us for good. No qualms about it. Just a huge signing. Congratulations to Fred Warner. Just a crucial piece. The Niners, again, solidifying all of the key pieces that need to stay. The Kyle Juszczyks, the George Kittles, the Fred Warners of the world. Hopefully Nick Bosa will resume his normal self and also solidify him in the years going forward as a just consummate staple in the 49ers pass rush, but time will tell. But as it stands right now, we just re-signed one of our best players on defense.
A monster signing. Like you said, this pretty much locks him up for the remainder of his peak years. And I cannot be more excited for it. This season is, where are we at here? It's July 22nd. We're about, 3.5 weeks away from the start of the regular season, somewhere in there, something like that. And I cannot be more ready. I am so hyped. I am so ready for the Niners to return because I believe we going back, baby. We going back to finish what we started. I cannot wait. And yeah, this signing is great. Congratulations to Fred Warner. Excellent, excellent, excellent. All right, Raymond, let's talk about the crazy. Oh, I like that. I'm going to keep Fred up there because he makes me happy. But I like that you put up the NFL logo because this is... Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the new COVID protocols that have been put in place. According to NFL Network's Tom Pelissero, he reported Thursday that the NFL sent a memo to its clubs stating that if a game cannot be rescheduled during the 18-week schedule due to a COVID-19 outbreak among unvaccinated players, the team with the outbreak will forfeit and be credited with a loss, per sources. In addition, players on both teams will not be paid for the lost contests, and the team responsible for the canceled game due to unvaccinated players will cover financial losses and be subject to potential discipline from the commissioner's office. If a game is canceled/postponed because a club cannot play due to a COVID spike among or resulting from its non-vaccinated players and staff, then the burden of the cancellation or delay will fall on the club experiencing the COVID infection. This is what it says in the memo. This is the official legalese here. We will seek to minimize the burden on the opposing club or clubs if a club cannot play due to a COVID spike in vaccinated individuals. We will attempt to minimize the competitive and economic burden on both participating teams. According to NFL Network's Judy Batista, she reported that players beginning to report for camps, progress on vaccination has increased. More than 78% of the players league-wide have had at least one shot, and 14 clubs have at least 85% of players vaccinated. Pelissero reported that all 32 teams have at least 50% vaccination rate among them. So, Raymond, where do you stand on these COVID protocols? We did not talk pre-show, so now I'm going to get your take right here, just like with the rest of the GoldCast Empire. Where do you stand on these new COVID regulations that the NFL dropped today?
I think the NFL is being very careful with the language here, but at the same time, another lawyer, in my opinion, could also be very clever with language and potentially, I think, well, let me start with this. I think that this rule opens up some potentially murky waters for lawsuits from players against the league, because you could have a lawyer formulate language just as cleverly as the NFL has with this rule to suggest that there is a suggestive mandate embedded within this rule to force players to take a vaccine that, in my opinion, I think they should have the arbitrary right to elect out of it. For just full disclosure, I have the vaccine, but I think that they should still have the right to choose that, especially when it comes to their body. We don't know, there's not, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the vaccine itself, but, players could have underlying issues that could conflict with the vaccine, which would then preclude them from taking it in the first place. There's that. And then there's other people that perhaps just don't feel comfortable. And I think that unless there's conditions to this rule that state that, right now all we have is the face value of the rule itself. So until more information comes out, I'm going to presume that information is not in there, but once it does come out, I'll gladly change my statement. But as it stands right now, there was no added lingo to these reports saying that there is exceptions to players who perhaps have potential allergies or conditions that would preclude them from taking the vaccine, and doesn't necessarily say that you have the right to do it if you feel uncomfortable. Remember, this is not FDA approved. It was FDA approved under emergency actions, but it is not FDA approved the way a normal vaccine is approved. So, there's reason to be cautious there, plus the fact that normally vaccines have years and years of research under their belt to weigh out all of the risks associated with it before it goes out to the public. We didn't have that at all. We don't even have a year of research under our belt with this vaccine. So I think there's lots of room for opinions to be made as to whether to take it or whether not to take it. And I think that this kind of underhanded way of forcing a vaccine mandate, which to me, I think opens up some bad blood between players and the league, which, already has bad blood in other categories.
I was going to say, there's already a lot of bad blood between the players and the league. All right, here's where I stand on it. I am actually completely fine with the rule. I'm completely fine with it. I just think back to last year when the Denver Broncos literally had to start a wide receiver at quarterback and play what was a completely unwatchable football game. Unwatchable. But then other teams like the Ravens and Pittsburgh were allowed to play their games at different weeks, and it clearly looked like there was favoritism being handed out depending on the team, depending on the level of talent, depending on the quarterback, depending on the ratings draw, and that bugged me. That bugged me, and it made for some unwatchable games. It made for a really sloppy season at times, and I'm glad that all games got played. I'm glad we got through it. We got all the way to the Super Bowl. Ended up being, a very entertaining postseason. But I just think the level of product on the screen, it's like what they always say, like on PTI, for instance, right? Like they always like to talk about how this is a television show. It's an entertainment product, and football's an entertainment product. And I just think that as an entertainment product, it doesn't do itself any favors with all the schedule messing and all the playing around. So if it's there, just schedule the loss. The problem that I have, the one issue that I have with this particular mandate, I have a major problem with the teams not getting paid. I'm actually fine if the team that lost didn't get paid, but like the team that won doesn't get paid, but they didn't even do anything wrong. And so now they're being financially penalized because the other team is not following or taking the proper safety measures to avoid a COVID outbreak. Like, and whatever those measures are, I'm not saying it has to be the vaccine. I'm talking about just following, whatever basic protocols you need to follow to be able to play a full season as a professional athlete, you take, So that part, I'm not saying they have to take the vaccine or not. I don't really care if they do or don't. That's their prerogative. But I have a major problem with penalizing the team that didn't do anything wrong by taking their pay away. I have a big problem with that.
I think that's a huge issue, too, that just compounds on my position to a degree, even though we don't agree on the first part of it. And the other thing, too, like if most of the team, let's say hypothetical, most of the team is vaccinated, then you have like maybe one or two outliers. And last year we had those rules in place because we just didn't know enough. And we were just being overly precautious about the virus, which is understandable given those circumstances. Now we know a hell of a lot more, and we have a vaccine. So do the old rules even need to still apply if you have one or two outliers and the rest of the team is vaccinated? Because that's kind of the point, is everyone who's vaccinated is not in any inherent harm than, from one or two players, especially given how much we know is how much effectiveness the virus is against the second, the variant, in addition to the first version of it. Let's say they get the first version. If they get the first version, no harm, no foul. I think you play on, and if the player's ready to, if he's capable of playing, then you play him, and if he's not, then you pull him. But if it's like a quarterback or something, like all those crazy rules, I think you just go out of those rules altogether. I know that it's easier to just forego it if they're vaccinated, but if they're not, I think based on what we know now, and coupled with the fact that we have vaccine protection for what will eventually be majority of players and coaching staff, then I think there's just not enough risk there to implement a rule with such dire circumstances that not only decide the outcome of games, but also decide, your paycheck that month or that week, I should say. It's just too much of a too heavy-handed of a rule.
Well, you got to remember, though, too, that they're not talking about one or two players getting COVID. The exact language is if a game is canceled or postponed because a club cannot play due to a COVID spike among or resulting from its non-vaccinated players/staff. So it has to be a situation like they said, all 32 teams are at least 50% vaccinated, right? So it has to be that like 10 players go down, like we had a couple crazy things like that happen last year, right? Where like
so it's an outbreak. So if one or two guys are injured, then they either won't play. They most likely won't play, I presume. Even if they don't exhibit any symptoms, I'm assuming that they will be disqualified from participating. But hypothetically speaking, if they could play, I think they should. But I guess that's a separate issue. But either way, this rule just doesn't, I know some players agree with it, some players don't. I'm on the opposite end where, of the DeAndre Hopkins, the Jalen Ramseys that had some voices to say I don't necessarily agree with Quincy Avery. But I think that players need to be free to make their own, it's when it's time to think of the team, that's during the sport that you're played to play. These outside circumstances, I think, should not be brought in and intermixed with the game the way it is. At least not based on everything that we know now. We know a lot more. We have a lot more protection that something like this shouldn't be necessary, in my opinion, especially given the nature of how open everything else is up to this point.
Well, but the perspective of the NFL, and this is where I see it from their end, and why I do agree with them, is that they're saying, listen, if you guys are going to choose whatever lifestyle you choose, but unfortunately this virus has the ability to literally force entire teams to not play, and we already saw that last year, right? It takes so many people out that we can't play the game that you guys are hired to play. And if that's the risk you're willing to take, well, then this is the punishment for not this is the punishment for not being able to do your job. Basically.
Yeah, but there's nuance there because there were lots of players that had COVID that had no symptoms. And there were certainly players that exhibited everything under the sun that is reminiscent of a flu. So it wasn't conclusive that if you got it, you were just taken out. Sometimes if you tested positive, whether it was a false positive or not, which also Niners had false positives, and we lost players on a couple of games because of what turned out to be false positives, because the rule that was in place said if you got it, you can't play. Doesn't matter what symptoms you got or not, you can't play. So I push back a little bit there because there's a little bit of gray area because there's plenty of players out there that don't exhibit any symptoms, but because it shows up on the test result, they are now prohibited from playing. And I think that needs to be. I think that needs to be updated in this rule if we're going to go forward because, the virus more often than not with their age group and their health condition is most likely not going to do anything. That is by and large a factual data that we have where majority of people are fine unless they have comorbidities and other factors, contributing to their health in a negative way. But in this case, I think that, the fact that some players were really sick and lots of players were not, but they just weren't allowed to play because of a rule, not necessarily because of the virus. That's all I'm saying.
I don't know. It's a tricky one.
It is.
What say you, GoldCast Empire? Where do you stand on this protocol? If a team cannot play due to COVID due to a COVID outbreak, should that be an automatic loss? Here's the one thing I will say, Raymond, and then we got to go. It could really mess with a couple fantasy games.
Yes. Oh my God.
You didn't even think about that, did you?
I didn't even think about that.
It could really mess with some fantasy out there. There could be some major fantasy implications to this.
I have to turn on I have a fantasy YouTube channel that I follow. I have to turn them on and actually, I'm now curious to see what they think about this rule because that does have some major implications, which also ties into the betting world, which is another element of that whole league. Our league has financial implications tied to it. So that's crazy big too. And the NFL is also a participant, in some of that revenue as well. So, I mean, they are in a sense, potentially shooting themselves in the foot in that regard too. I guess this rule's in place, right? It's not like they're proposing it. This is like going to happen.
No, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. They said they do not anticipate needing a week 19 to finish these games. So
yeah, and I think they should have had this up for a vote with the NFLPA because it has an inherent tie to players. I don't understand why they didn't.
Again, I'm okay with it. I just think that penalizing the team who won on paper without pay, I think that's pretty whack.
That's even worse. I'd be curious to see what your boy Marcellus Wiley has to think about this.
I'd be curious to see what my boy Marcellus Wiley has to say about it too. I'm going to have to go check it out. We're going to talk to him next time he's in the restaurant. But what say you, GoldCast Empire? Where do you stand on this rule? Is it fair? Should players be paid regardless if the game is canceled? How mad would you be if you've got Alvin Kamara and it's a championship game and the Saints can't play? Let us know in the comments, because that was me last year. That's how I won. Let us know in the comments. Go to youtube.com/thegoldcast. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Join us. Join the party. And so concludes another edition of the GoldCast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy III, and with me is my brother, my co-host, Raymond
Solis the first, baby.
Boom! I don't know what I was doing. My co-host. We'll see you next time. Same GoldCast time, same GoldCast channel.